Last time we spoke, you were in Derek. I know that you've been working in and around Tel Tamir for the past week or so, right?
Mhm.
Can you tell me what have you been working on while you've been there?
So there's been two main bits of work since we've been here. In general, we've been trying to visit the refugees who are, or IDPs, they've been called, who internally displaced people who are coming in from this annexed region, which is now being ethnically cleansed between Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain, or Serikani. This is a sort of like 30-kilometre deep, 80-kilometre wide zone, which has now been annexed by Turkey, and the refugees are sort of flooding into Tel Tamer. We've been visiting various sites of civil resistance, putting up tarpaulin in the streets so that drones could see. We've been going to a lot of funerals. And then the other half of our work has been with these humanitarian convoys that have been trying to get into Serikani. We went on three, and finally on the third one, I managed to get in the lead cars that were leading the ambulances into Serikani, which was an interesting experience. And we got a lot of wounded out. So those took up quite a lot of time and energy.
I'm right in thinking that convoy, that there were warning shots fired at you or dropped at you.
So in total, there were 5 convoys over the last 2 weeks trying to break the siege. The first one, which was just before I got here, it got in. Just as it got into the suburbs of Çanakkale, just as it got into the suburbs of Serikani on the border with Turkey, it's a besieged city, it was hit by an airstrike and 18 people killed and something like 80 was seriously injured. Then, just after I got here, there was a fairly hastily arranged convoy of Medani people from the city. These are like, I mean, literally just 200 people from the city took their cars and vans and just tried to drive through the siege. It was not particularly well organised. We got fairly close, and then we noticed cars we were at the back, cars at the front started coming back past us, and we'd heard that some of them had been fired on. As we got closer to the front, it's about 4 kilometres away from Serikani, some shells started landing, not too far away, probably about 1 kilometre from us. We presume they were warning shells, warning shots.
So the last time we spoke was just prior to the so-called pause.
Yeah.
Last time you and I spoke, and obviously prior to the deal with the Syrian government. How have those two things, so the putative pause by Turkey and that arrangement with the Syrian government, how have they changed things on the ground, if at all?
I mean, they were both particularly cynical moves from both sides, as far as I can see it. Particularly the Turkish so-called pause. The only time we're aware of that this pause really happened was in this fourth convoy, the third one I was on that finally got through. Certainly, I witnessed on the first 2 convoys munitions falling on the city of Serikani. When we spoke to the fighters inside the hospital, the only time that the fighting, particularly the bombardment and the use of heavy weapons, the only time it had eased up was when our convoy was coming through. There's an American aid organization here, just quite a small unit of mostly ex-army guys, and I've been speaking to them, and they have come under attack several times in their area during this so-called pause. It really hasn't been a pause. It's been something to placate the international community. It's been something that's been used as a bargaining chip. And they realise that there's not really much in the international media here. They realise that they can get away with this. From the regime side, there's been a lot of bluster. There's been almost not parading, but, all but parading around. They've occupied some of the, I say occupied, they're not doing the controls or checks yet, but they are visible on many of the main roads and along a lot of the border regions. But the deal for them to come here did not include this annexed pocket. And they have only been involved in very sporadic fighting in the far northwest in Manbij. They've sent a lot of men. They've sent about 40,000 soldiers. the equipment they've sent that I've seen is not really much of a match for the Turkish military, and I don't think is really expected to be used against them.
Because there is now this deal, of course, with between Erdogan and Putin, which is we just received news of the other day. It does feel, I mean, or the sense that we get, in terms of reporting, is that there is a deal being made among the great powers here, which has very little to do with actually what's happening on the ground there. You have been obviously speaking to the media a great deal. There's obviously been a sort of great deal of interest, both in you, I think, but also in the situation on the ground. What's your sense of what's getting through to the Western media and what's not?
I think for me, and maybe this is quite a personal thing, but I think this is also the most important. I think the thing that's being lost in the media is what is being lost for humanity in this place. It's nearly all of the reporting is either focused on sort of real political aspects of the power bargaining, America's place in the world, the dealings between the imperial powers, or at least the regional powers, or it's focused on the war crimes that are taking place, the children who have had their skin burnt off, the very visible atrocities that have happened. I think what isn't really being discussed is the value that this place had as a project of democracy, of a project of feminism, and a project of socialism. It was very much a living, breathing example of socialism in action, successfully in action, and very much in a self-determined way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a moment where you can see that someone has told Trump that actually this is a left-wing political polity, and you can see actually the way in which his conversation changes. I mean, the other thing, of course, or the thing that's used instead to talk about this stuff is, and it particularly comes out from Turkish briefing, and it also comes out from some briefing now from the United States as well, which is that, well, actually, Turkey is just targeting terrorists. So I just give me some pushback on that.
I mean, it's they're not wrong, because every Kurd, when they're dead, ends up becoming described as a member of the PKK. This is the general feeling here. I mean, one of the biggest. A real mockery of this was something I witnessed earlier today. There was a march from Mala Shahidin, which is the house of the fallen, the house of the martyrs. It's I don't know, it's like the Royal British Legion of this area. It's where the families of the fallen gather and they have gardens and so on. There was a march from there to the centre of the city, and then people got in their cars and went to a very I think cathartic funeral. Emotional funeral, and I took this video of this march, and it was just completely full of YPG flags, YPG, YPJ, STF. And people flying these flags were teenage girls, mothers, grandmothers, old men, people in wheelchairs. It was every strata of society. It was every class, in so much as there's class here. It was a whole bunch of different of races, religions. It was truly multi-ethnic. These are the terrorist supporters and the terrorists that Turkey is targeting. So what, they're not wrong when they say that, but it's their definition of terrorist which really needs to be considered.
Okay, I mean, I think in some ways, so the last time we spoke, you talked about there being a really strong and thick kind of communal sense of intention to resist on the ground, and you said, in fact, very movingly, about how far that had penetrated, throughout, every aspect, every front of the city, as it were. Obviously, since then, there have been, some really astonishingly brutal assaults. Obviously, as you were saying, we've seen some of the footage now. We've seen just some of the stuff coming out, not only from uh, Islamist mercenaries who are fighting for Turkey, who are very proud of some of the atrocities they're committing. Do you have a sense of, has this had an effect on the way in which people are thinking about their relationship to the conflict, about how far they're willing to resist?
Yeah, I think so. There is very much still this area of resistance, but it's a different kind. It's not a joyous, jubilant kind, as I described it before. It's more we're backed into a corner kind. It's more of a feeling of revenge than a feeling of defense. I think particularly the fall of Serikani was very difficult. Many people were expecting this to be a Kobani moment, like back in 2014 against ISIS. I think one of the really difficult things as well is this realization that now every regional power is more or less involved in some way. There's I don't know how to describe it. There's a sense that our best way to resist and retain something might be to get some kind of deal. That's very difficult for people to process, and people are processing it in different ways. But there's this conflicted feeling that we want to fight for ourselves. That there's this romantic notion of everybody taking a Kalashnikov and defending their home, and which in some way has been true of the Kurds for a long time. But there's also a current of feeling that if we do want to retain at least something, and we don't all want to die in this conflict, then maybe we do need to make a deal, and this kind of fighting in the streets isn't going to be something that's tenable. And so there's a lot of conflicting feelings. There's a lot of confusion. And at the moment, there's not a lot of information to process this. The deal only came out last night, and there's still not a lot of comment from the self-administration.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the deal between the great powers has been, or the regional powers have been struck, such as to effectively force withdrawal from Manbij, Kobani, perhaps just all towards Kamishli. I don't know. That's sort of how it feels at the moment. I wonder, because there have been, and I think it has been sort of inspiring in some ways to see actually the wave of protest and support. And here in London, there've been a couple of really big demonstrations actually, with the left and Kurdish populations together. But it does seem to me that there's now not a great deal that can be done in terms of kind of popular mobilization on that front. Obviously, there's pressure that can be put on in terms of attempting to find some sort of settlement that could preserve something of what's been going on there. But it's hard to figure out where, in terms of political action, things can be done here. I wonder if there's a route here to support. I mean, obviously, the Kurdish Red Crescent is pretty much the only organization I know of that's operating in terms of rescue and retrieval where you are. What else can we do?
I mean, my first point would be that I think it's important to see the act of protest beyond the context of demanding change. These actions are vitally important for people here. They've been vitally important for us, because of this notion that there are no friends at the moment, that there is no one looking out for the Kurds, and to show people the kind of popular mobilization there is across the world for them is really eye-opening for a lot of the people here. It gives them a lot of hope and a lot of strength, which is sorely needed. I think the pressure can still be piled on. I think political action can still happen. This isn't over yet. This is far from over. As fast as have moved over the last 2 weeks, this is still a region of millions and millions of people. There are still 100,000 plus members of the SDF that are heavily armed, and most of them are not going to give up that easily. There are ongoing war crimes and atrocities which really need to be covered and reported and pushed. And there are repercussions for Turkey which need to be pushed hard. So mobilization still has a lot of value, and it's not something I want to discount. It's something that I want people to continue pushing. In terms of a sort of more like pragmatic, direct support, you're right. The Hayvasura Kurds, the Kurdish Red Crescent movement, are more or less the only group on the ground. They have a good presence across the Kurdistan region. They're not just in Syria, and they are one of the few groups that's able to get vital aid across borders. So yes, I certainly recommend people support them financially if they can. There will be an increasing humanitarian crisis within Basra, the Kurdistan region of Iraq. This is an area where international organizations are more able to operate, and so also providing aid to these organizations is going to be vitally important over the next few weeks and months.
There's I think a deplorable tendency on the left at the moment in terms of responding to this stuff that I have found actually pretty infuriating, which is to treat it's a kind of pseudo-realism to treat Rojava as being over. That it's over already, that there's nothing that can be done. I don't think that's true. But how far can it be preserved?
I mean, it clearly cannot be preserved in the state it was, in the sort of blissful, sort of heady days of this last year. And this part is clearly over. And this is very much within the spirit of the movement here. The spirit of the movement is very much one of education and criticism. It's one that believes that from any situation you should be able to take education, you should be able to improve yourself, and that things should not be thrown away. They should be brought closer. They should be criticised. For instance, there's no culture here of shaming or of exclusion. When someone does something wrong, they are brought closer into the community. In general, this is the practice, and I think this will be applied to this project. There will be criticism within the community of how they could have handled this better, how they could have maintained more autonomy. But there will also be a very pragmatic educational approach to how can we learn from what's happened and preserve as much as possible and push on in future. We've seen this happen before. The movements, and there are multiple Kurdish movements, Kurdish self-determination movements, obviously the most famous of which is the PKK, but there are several across the region. And they've all gone from what's now known as the old paradigm of a very sort of Marxist-Leninist, we want our own state, we want socialism within this own state that's guaranteed by a vanguard, to various different forms of federalism, confederalism, democratic socialism. And that came about by seeing that the Marxist-Leninist approach was not working within the various occupying states of Kurdistan. And they saw that democratic confederalism really did work very well in Rojava and northeast Syria. And so no doubt it will evolve. Like, these Kurds are not going to disappear. It would have to be one huge purge for them all to disappear overnight. And the fact that there are still something like 30 or 40,000 fighters in the mountains of Turkey and Iraq, despite 40 years of Turkey bombing them, shows quite how resilient the Kurds are to this kind of stuff. So, it's far from over, and we're not going to give up. They are not going to give up. We will continue to support this as hard as we can, and also we're going to take these lessons that we've learned to other places and try to spread those seeds around.
Okay, just last question. What's your sense of what's coming in the next few days? What's the sense on the ground and among the people you are with for what's coming?
It's very hard to predict. It's in a quite a spiral at the moment. We're perhaps kind of expecting it to be peaceful for the next few days because that's supposedly what Turkey has declared. But it's very much up in the air. There are certainly a lot of people here who, no matter what deal is made, are not going to accept Turkish incursions. We've seen before that even in Afrin, where these Turkish Islamist mercenaries have more or less complete territorial control of a large part of the Afrin region, they have a completely unchecked and, dare I say, vibrant insurgency battling them. They've barely even started to put a lid on. This is undoubtedly going to happen here if really oppressive measures are taken. So we expect there will be perhaps an uneasy peace for a short period of time, but who knows what's going to happen after that. We certainly don't. It's hard to see the wood through the trees, and it's hard to know. It's hard to know when deals are made and when things are announced. Quite what they're representing, what has been given up in response to them, and what deal has been made that we don't know about. And it certainly seems like there's a lot more to this deal than meets the eye.
Okay, Dani, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We will obviously stay in touch and keep getting stuff out of where you are. Obviously, everyone at Navarro is thinking of you, and everyone else with you.
Great. Thank you very much.